I titled the storytelling, the session storytelling for PMs, and for me, storytelling's always been a challenge. So I'm just curious, when you hear about storytelling for PMs, what do you think about? Anybody? Nobody?
Challenging.
Challenging?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yes?
Being concise.
Being concise, okay. What types of stories do you think PMs need to be comfortable with? Yeah, in the back.
Your persona, walk them through the value proposition.
Okay, sure. Yeah, those are great. Other thoughts about story? Anybody scared of telling stories? Or feel like, how the hell do you tell a story in the first place?
I think for slightly off the, may not answer your question directly, but one of the things is that storytelling for PM would be good if we can get whatever we want by telling a story that excites the other person.
Okay, so exciting people as a goal, or getting people aligned with you?
Persuasion.
Yeah. What's one of the most important things that we try to persuade people to do as product managers?
Build stuff.
There's multiple answers to this question.
Remember, first of all.
Okay, remember. Okay, sure.
Take actions.
Take action, sure.
Buy our product.
Buy our product. That's I think, personally, I think that's the #1 responsibility we have as product managers, is to get people to buy our product. Even though we don't directly do that typically, right? That's usually some salesperson that does it, or marketing, or there's a website or whatever. But we're the people that supposedly know who should buy it and why they should buy it. So we're an important part of the messaging. And the messaging, as I think somebody said, to get engagement, that's really important to have stories. So that's sort of the genesis of why stories are a thing for product managers. Anyway, any other thoughts before I get going? I mean, I guess I'm going already, but I'm sort of vamping a little bit, but I think people are here now, so.
One question is,
Yes.
is storytelling something that now everyone's talking about, or is it like 10 years ago people kind of knew? I don't know if this is like some sort of like a hype, or now it's more common, or it's always been there.
That is a really good question, because, for example, 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, in the city, Product Tank, which is a product manager meetup, had it was 2 talks about stories, about storytelling. And SVPMA in the last year had a session about storytelling. And so, in some sense, there is this like, oh, everybody's talking about stories. But the fact is, people have been talking about stories for a long time. I think one of the differences is people are starting to understand, maybe product managers are starting to understand, that we all understand that stories are really important, but we don't necessarily know how to do it in an effective way. And so I know for me, that's always been a challenge. It's like, okay, Joseph Campbell's, hero's journey, whatever, the 27 story archetypes, screenwriting. I've read a bunch of screenwriting books and things like that. And even though I know that, it's like this really important skill, and we talked about for selling your product, for selling yourself. I'll talk a little bit about that. Slides will be available. You're welcome to take pictures, but I will make the slides available. And for selling your ideas, so the other thing that nobody mentioned, I think, or you sort of implied, was one of the things we have to do is we have to sell executives, other people that have money, that they should give that money to us to do something with it, right? Whether it's create a new feature, create a new product, start a company, something like that. So stories are used in all these selling processes. So I'm now thinking I should have put this slide later, because it's a good summary slide. We might come back to it. But let me just say, from the outset, what are some of the characteristics of a good sales story? Well, one of the things that it really needs to be is true. And we all know, I'm sure we've all experienced that situation where our salesperson sells something that doesn't exist. And so you want to avoid, we all know that's a pretty bad situation to have happen to you. And so that's something we want to avoid. I say that it should be true directionally, and what I mean by that is you know, maybe you don't say that it was Google that had this success, this whole thing. Maybe you say a big enterprise a big software company or a big online company. You know, you don't have to give every detail in the story. Sometimes you might lead over some details. You might say, you might combine multiple customers that had sort of similar results, and you might turn that into one story. But generally, your story should be true. That's the bottom line. So, but more importantly, well, not as important, the story needs to be emotionally compelling. And this is one of the things that, in the last year, I learned some techniques for doing this in a relatively straightforward way. It sounds hard. It always sounded hard to me to how to do this, but I think I'm going to give you some tools that will help. What else do I say here? It should be exciting. Think about a movie. You know, movies are great examples of storytelling, and so you think about what makes a good movie from a storytelling standpoint. Things happen. It's exciting. It's compelling. You want to keep watching. You don't walk out. You want your story to be the same way, except that it's not going to be an hour and a half. It's going to be a couple minutes at most. And there's this aspect of being compact and wanting to leave people wanting more. And actually, movies do that too, right? Who doesn't want to see Black Panther 2? Hardly anybody, right? Maybe some people, but you know, we're all waiting with bated breath on Avengers: Infinity War. And I'm not even like a comic book person or anything like that, but I can't wait. You know, it's like, I'm excited. So the question is, how do we make this happen? Okay, so here is probably you know this structure. The basic story structure is beginning, middle, and end, right? Do you now know how to tell a story? Do you? So for me, this is useless. I don't know. I mean, what do I put in the beginning, right? Because I know. I mean, time says that there's a beginning and a middle and an end. I don't even need somebody to list those out. I know those happen. But the question is, what happens during the beginning, the middle, and the end? And so, if you're talking about stories that are for selling things, a good basic structure, and this isn't the only structure, it's not going to win you a Nobel Prize in literature probably, but it will work for the purpose, is that the beginning is about some problem or opportunity. And we'll talk about what those look like, but in the sales story, for example, if you think about your customers, your successful customers, what was the problem they were facing when they decided to buy your product? The middle part of the story is the solution. What did the customer do? Well, they bought our product. Or there might be a little bit more. They tried some other products, they didn't work. They bought our product, it worked. And then the end is really, what was the outcome? How did this improve things for, in this case, the customer? If you're telling a story about yourself, then the beginning is a problem you were presented with. The middle is the solution that you did. The ending is the results that you had on the problem, and maybe some way that you changed, or that the world changed around you because of your actions. So this is what we call the PSR structure, problem, solution, result. There are other story structures that are very similar to this. You might have heard of, particularly if you've taken, these are often talked about in sort of job interviewing workshops. There's SOAR, situation, opportunity, action, result. There's STAR, which is something, something, action, result, I don't know what. But they're all roughly the same. But the key point is, this now gives you some idea what to put in the beginning of your story, what to put in the middle of your story, and what to put in the end of your story. Does that make sense? Does that immediately give you a feeling, did for me, of, oh, I can work with that, right? Because, I mean, so think about some of your customer situations. Do you have a customer who's successful with your product? Hopefully you do. Have you ever had a customer in any of your products successful with your product? Hopefully you have. Can you say what their problem was before they got your product, right? Why did they buy it? Do you know the answer to that? I'm sure you do. How about some example? Anybody got an example of that? Why did the customer buy your product? What was the problem that a customer was facing before they buy your product? Anybody have an example?
I have an example.
Yes.
I was working so many years ago as a network an analyst, and I get a customer. It was a tier 3 problem, so I had to fix a problem that nobody was able to fix in the network. The problem, he called many times. He was completely irate. He didn't want to be transferred to another department or anything like that. He was irate. And when I was looking at his account, he was requesting us to program 25 features that people don't use in his phone line. And that was going to take me at least 2-3 hours of my time. So I needed to know why he was having this problem. And I started listening to him and being very empathetic, and I took on her sheet and I said, of course, I will transfer you. I will be more than happy to help you to program those features on your phone line. However, I just have one question. What is the use that you give to those features? Because it seems that you have him talking with so many people, like at least 14 people before me, and they didn't do that. So I wanted to know why they didn't, and what was the reason why he needed that. And he said, my wife is blind. She doesn't hear very well. She needs those features. That's it. That was enough.
Oh, yeah.
It took me 3 hours, 4 hours of my time to do it, but I did it. So before, nobody asked that question. So you see, and that makes me feel really bad, because this is a customer that I have a need. But he was happy at the end.
That's fantastic. That's a great story. You passed already. You don't have to take the rest of the class. Very good story. It was a really interesting story for a couple reasons. We'll come back to some of them. But I think one of the things that was really great about your story, and I don't know if anybody noticed this, it was very emotionally engaging. And it's like, I'm tearing up a little bit about this, about your ability to get to the root of the story. So there's an example of a problem that her customer had and she was able to solve. So I just asked somebody for a story, but now so your story's already great. I wonder if anybody has a story that they would like to share, and we will work on making it better. About 10 minutes, we'll do about 10 minutes of work on your story. And the story can be a customer success story that you want to make better. It could be a story that you tell about yourself in a job interview that you want to improve. It could be, what are the other things it could be? Those are the two big ones. So, or a feature pitch. We could talk about a feature pitch. So you had your hand up first.
Okay.
Do you have a story? Or do you
I
want
have a story about a past product that I have worked with
Uh-huh.
and a customer success story.
Okay.
This product,
Oh, I should tell one thing. So I mentioned the book. If you are the volunteer, you get a copy of the book.
okay. Oh, great. In retail, major problem is having accurate inventory of what products are in the store and what aren't. And for various reasons, inventory can be off by up to 40% because they take a major inventory only once or twice a year. So with this product, they can attach RFID tags to everything in the store and quickly take an inventory. Instead of taking 2 days, it only takes 2 hours. So they can update their inventory weekly if they would like, and keep their inventory accurate. And the result of that is that they get increased sales by knowing which products to refresh, and also to save time and cost of performing the inventory.
Okay, great. So that was a very well structured story. You talked about a problem, you talked about the solution that you had, and you talked about the results. So how emotionally compelling do you feel that story is?
Probably not very.
Okay. Anybody else have a? I mean, you've obviously told that story before. Came sort of trippingly off the tongue. So should we try to make it a little more emotionally compelling?
I think, yeah,
What-
think it needs it.
Okay. So, what are some things that make stories emotionally compelling?
People.
People, right, that's a useful thing to add in there. What else?
Empathy. Empathy is what it
Empathy,
was.
okay,
It's
yeah.
one of the- Making it more personal.
Make it more personal, okay. We'll talk about some things like that.
Relatable.
Relatable. How about things that make think about a problem, all right? Think about the James Bond movie. Everybody seen a James Bond movie from the beginning? It's important to see it from the beginning. What happens at the beginning of a James Bond movie? You all know the answer to this question. What?
The shot.
No, when the
action
actual action starts.
Oh,
Somebody just said it.
Action sequence.
Action sequence. And what is this relation of that? What is so amazing about all James Bond movies? They all start with the action sequence. And it just goes and goes and goes, and he's in worse and worse and worse situations until he finally gets out, and then the movie starts, really, the actual story. So that's a little different from PSR, there's like a pre-problem and then a problem. But the key point about the James Bond movies, they start in action. It's called, another word, in media res. It's a Latin term for how movies often start, right? They start with things happening. So that's a thing that you can use as part of your story to make it more compelling. Another good word for that is vertical takeoff. So we're going to work on the vertical takeoff. The other thing that you might think about, particularly for a story that's about a business result, is what were the implications of the problem if it wasn't solved, from a business standpoint, and maybe from a personal standpoint. So we talked about 4 things: a person, vertical takeoff, a business result, and a personal result. So I'll ask you some questions. So, was there an actual person that you were working with? Think about one of your successful customers, and let's talk about that person.
Yes, so this would be, this story could be told to many different people in this
Sure.
process. We can pick a store manager.
Store manager, perfect. So, the store manager came to me and said, this problem is horrible, I have this horrible situation, this is what's gonna happen. What is this?
Well, they work with a customer. This is typically in the fashion industry. The customer finds article of clothing that she likes. They find out her size. They go in the back of the store and it's not there.
What's the impact of that?
The impact of that is that they have a lost sale. Customer is not satisfied, probably very unhappy, and they may not be able to get the product to actually make the sale.
And what happens to the store manager if this keeps happening?
And so this keeps happening. They will lose daily revenues and also maybe lose a customer.
Will they get fired? Not
They-
promoted?
It could have personal impacts on them too.
Okay. I'm trying to get to a personal impact.
Yeah.
As you can see. So, let's think about restating your problem with those things. And I can do it for you, you can try it yourself if you want.
Maybe you can help.
Okay, so, something along the lines of, at my last product, I worked with a store manager who was facing incredible inventory shrinkage or not being able to track. It was a daily occurrence where he lost customers, lost track of inventory, couldn't provide customers with what they came to the shop to buy. And really, if this kept going, his job was on the line. I just sort of echoed back what you said. It's directionally true, right? Any given store manager may not actually have the job on the line, but if it keeps happening, somebody's gonna lose their job. The company might go out of business, right? Then that's, you're not gonna get promoted, you could use that as a term. So that's an example of doing the things we talked about, making it more personal. It's a little more, is that more emotionally grabby? Did you think of how to do that for one of your stories that you tell about yourself or about your product? So, solution. I'm gonna skip over the solution. Typically, in Silicon Valley, us technologists don't have a problem with the solution. The problem we have with the solution is we say way too much about the solution. So the fact that you said very little was actually great. We put RFID tags on the things, the problem goes away. Okay, so let's think about the results though. So you said the results were that you suddenly had management of inventory. Okay. Mostly compelling? Okay. So how we go through the same sort of thinking to make the results emotionally compelling. The person, the business result, and sort of a quantifiable business result. And in fact, the rule of thumb is whatever you talked about in the problem, you pay off in the results. Right? So I'm just going to do this off the top of my head, but after implementing our solution, the customer not only practically eliminated the inventory problem, their customer satisfaction index went way high. They almost never had a situation where somebody came in to buy something that wasn't there. And if we knew, if it did happen, we knew how to order it, where it was. And that store manager got a promotion as a result. He's now a regional manager. I don't know if that's all true, but I'm sure it's somewhat true, right? Most of those things are true. And again, if you have an actual, if you know, like, oh, this store manager was on the edge, this store manager is now a regional manager, talk about that guy, that person, that woman. So I paid it all off. It's often nice to put another result in there as well. And not only that, but that store manager got a commendation from the president for having solved this big problem, and that was rolled out across all the stores. So sometimes you can pay it off a little more, right? So, thank you for your story. That was fantastic. Here's a copy of my book. Hope you enjoyed it. Put a review on Amazon if you did. Okay, so that was the story practice. Let's see what we did. So I'm now going to go through all the things we just did, but I'm going to have bullet points about them. So I don't know if I mentioned the vertical takeoff, but I used that. The store manager came to me, he was about to lose his job. That's a vertical takeoff. The point is to start in the action, to make something happen out the door. And what's interesting about this process is that you may have stories that you tell about yourself or about your customers. You can always find these things. There's always a person involved in your stories. And there's always something that's bad that's going to happen if your solution is implemented, right? Because nobody buys a product if there's not some really costly thing happening that's going wrong. So it's always there if you're a product manager. And if you're talking about using one of these stories to convince somebody to fund your idea, you'd better have found a big problem that somebody's willing to pay for. Otherwise, your product's going to fail anyway, so nobody should give you money for it. So it's always there. If it's not there, that's a really bad sign. There's also this opportunity thing. It could be that there's a bad thing that was going to happen if you didn't take advantage of an opportunity, until I stepped in. So concrete results are great. So if you could say inventory turnover was, or inventory uncertainty was X and now it's Y, that'd be a great thing to do. But even if you don't have qualitative results, if you don't have quantitative results, qualitative results that are concrete, like people were always able to find the thing they were looking for, is very powerful. You want to pay off everything that you mentioned in the problem. Generally speaking, quantitative business results are not that emotionally compelling. They're important. And one of the things that actually is really interesting to me, and if you go and look at customer success stories, like you go to any company's website that has customer success stories, they have these write-ups, you can download them, and they're going to have this write-up and it's going to talk about a person is probably not going to say what the emotionally grabby problems were. It's not going to say they're about to lose their job, generally. It's going to say, oh, and they increased sales by 10%. Yay! Well, it's not a yay situation. Most success stories, the way they're written today, because unfortunately we've had this thing drilled into us that business results are what drive business success or, marketing success, they're almost all about business results. There's almost never very much about emotional grabby results. As a result, you can take a success story from company A and you can change the name to company B and it'll be the exact same success story. It doesn't give you anything, it's not exciting. Nobody's selling anything extra because of those stories, I don't think. They're selling extra things because of these things, because of putting emotionally. Now, and in fact, if you ever find a company that has success stories that sort of have some of this thing, they feel really different. And it's interesting, sometimes small companies start with this more emotional stuff. They get a consultant in and they redo it and they take it all out and it's like, then they just become like all of their competitors. It's very sad. There's a company called, is it App Dynamics? They're a system monitoring company. They were growing really fast at one point, and they had originally the website it was a picture of an actual person who was an actual customer saying how much he loved this product for reasons that were not just business results. So I saw that, thought, that is awesome. They're doing a great job of marketing. That's definitely differentiating from all the other system management. And then a month later, I went back, and it was just like all the other sites. It was so sad. I was really sad about it. And the thing is, if you're in system monitoring and you have a good product, you might still be successful without putting that out on the website, but it's kind of disappointing.
Cisco acquired App Dynamics, and I think that change might have happened when Cisco acquired them.
No, it was before that. It was
Okay.
it was in 2000. It was in early 2015, which I think was before that, but and it might not have been App Dynamics. It might have been another one. But anyway, the point is, don't let that happen to you. I mean, I think the hypothesis is that we talked in the first slide, right? Stories are the way that people communicate. That's really the important thing. And so much of what we do in marketing is actually take out this part of stories that make people exciting, or make people excited about our stuff. And in fact, a lot of times if you look at like the salespeople that are successful, they're the ones that actually tell those stories. Or the marketing teams or the pitches that are successful, those tell the stories. No one has ever accelerated sales by saying, we helped our sales grow by 10% instead of 11%.
Have you seen Slack's blog? I've noticed it's about stories.
I have not, but I'm sure it is, yeah.
It's
Slack,
very contrasting.
and Slack totally understands this, right? Because every interaction with Slack has got a little emotional pull to it. Okay, what else? So, emotionally grabby. What are emotionally grabby? They're things that have to do with people. So, I got promoted, my customer got promoted, my customer, the one that there's a great book called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum by Alan Cooper. If you haven't read it, it's really worth reading. It's about, it's about user experience design and computer software design and how terrible it is. But one of the concepts in there is personal goals. He says that what really compels people is personal goals. Those are goals that are not business goals. Business goals are interesting. Personal goals are compelling. And then there's lots of negative ones. Like if you think about people, personal goals are things like, I don't want to look stupid in front of my boss. And there's a lot of software out there, or tools, or business processes, in which you are very likely to look stupid in front of your boss, because they're terrible, right? And so if you can give somebody a solution to a way of doing a business process so they don't look stupid, that's very compelling to people. It might not be as compelling to the boss, so you also have to have reasons for the boss, but for the user, that's going to be very compelling. If you give them a tool that the boss likes, but that makes them look stupid continually in front of their boss, your user are not going to use it, and it's going to be a failure, even if the boss likes it. Okay. Also, I talked to one customer. I was doing some research for a client, and one of the things the customer said was, we became the experts in the eyes of the rest of the company. So this is actually a product management consultant, his client, and she said to me, we became the experts in product management across the company. People came to us for knowledge about product management. So that's a giant success. She is now suddenly an expert. And so very emotionally grabby story. He has that on his website. This one is the one business result that I think is often really compelling to people, which is that we crushed our competitors. So, for example, I like if you're telling a story about fixing a sales problem, for example, you might start it with the problem being we're losing market share to our competitors. And the payoff is we now have taken all that market share back and we're crushing it. That's emotionally compelling even if you're not a salesperson. Because we love competition, humans. We love competition as humans. So that's the thing to remember. So if you can talk about some competitive win or advantage you get, that can often be compelling. Okay, so a little bit of coaching. Generally, people struggle with the problem and the solution and the results. People in this room, I mean. Because the solution is about what we're expert in, right? This is my product, my skills. We're expert in that. We love to talk about it. And we can go on and on about that stuff. And that's the thing we have to worry about is not going on and on. Whereas the problem, right, so you gave a perfect example. You had a story that you were very confident about the RFID part, but the problem was like very vague, the solution, the results very vague. But when you fix those two parts, boom, the story goes way up. So a list of questions for finding the pain. And so things like questions I asked you. What would have happened if this hadn't been solved? What was happening because it was a problem, right? So those are some things. How did you feel about it? If you're talking directly with how do you feel about this situation? Well, I'm super frustrated. I don't know how to manage this, right? And then you can put that back into your story. The store manager was super frustrated. He couldn't keep track of the inventory, right? Okay. For the solution, some guidance is what? Like I said, basically, don't go on and on, because again, it's what we like to talk about. Leave people wanting more. So I'm kind of not doing that in this session. I'm actually giving you everything. So I don't know if there'll be any questions at the end. If it's in particular, if you're doing a story that's for selling yourself, make sure the solution is about what you did, not what your team did. You can say, I led the team to do this, but don't say the team did this or we did this. Say, I did this. And focus it on that. For the results, it's often good to ask if somebody got recognition, somebody got a promotion, how they felt about it. And for all of these questions, a really good follow-up question, you get an answer and you say, tell me more. This is good for all kinds of questions. So there's a whole other thing I talk about, which is how to use questions to find out market problems. And the most important line there is not the question that you ask first, but this is what you say next. Tell me more. And then what? What happened then? The things that help people get further. Why is another really good one, right? Yeah, okay. So, how do you use these stories? So there's a couple more, just like 2-3 more slides, and then we can have questions or conversation. You can leave early, whatever. So, how do you use these stories? Well, I mentioned 3 big things. You're trying to sell your product, and so you're using customer stories to sell your product. You're trying to sell yourself, like in a job interview, and the third one is you're trying to sell a new idea to somebody who will fund it or allow you to do it or approve it. Okay, so the PSR structure is still there, but you're going to morph it a little bit because it's the way you talk about things is going to be a little different. So in a customer success story, you're going to talk about our customer had some problem, like we had here. Our customer had this inventory problem. It was very frustrating. He was about to lose his job. Company was going to go. Customer was going to go on. Customers hated him. Blah blah blah. Emotionally grabby. Make it business significant, and try to create a vertical takeoff. This will take some practice. You probably won't be able to do this right out of the box. And you can email me if you want some help, because I've done it a bit. The solution, they tried, so this is where the customer success story is a little different. And so we didn't quite get into this with yours. But it's really good often to say, they tried a bunch of other solutions that failed. They didn't know what to do. They were at their wits' end. They went out and looked for solutions, they couldn't find them, and then they found us. Something along those lines. Or they looked at all the solutions out there, they decided to go with us because of XYZ. Right? If you're trying to sell your product. And then you get into the results. their problem was solved, the champion got a big raise or a promotion, you know, all was good, they, you know, whatever, they love us. Now, if you're doing this in the course of sort of if you're doing a sales call, you probably want it kind of short. If you're doing it in a success story write-up, you might need to sort of intersperse these things a little bit so that it's not all, oh, here's a page of problem, here's a page of solution, here's a page of results. You might want to intersperse some results, give it a little color, things like that. Maybe you will win a Nobel Prize in Literature for that, but probably not the 90-second one. For the job interview, typically these stories are sort of a tell me about a time, right? Tell me about a time you were creative. Tell me about a time you helped a customer out of a big problem. That would be your story. And so in that case, roughly speaking, think about a 90-second story. About 1/4 of it is going to be problem, maybe half of it is going to be results, and another quarter is going to be results. Oh, sorry. Problem, half of it is solution, and then 1/4 of it is results at the end. So it's roughly 20 seconds, 50 seconds, 20 seconds, something like that. That's rough. Don't make it too long though, that's the big thing. You don't want to bore the person. You want them to say, oh, that was fantastic, tell me more about that. That's your goal. But it turns out that in 20 seconds, there is enough time to say 3 or 4 things about the problem that make it really grabby, that give it a vertical takeoff, that make it emotional. And there's enough time in 20 seconds of results to tie all those things up and to say even more. So that's the structure for that. Now, if you're pitching a solution, meaning if you're pitching an idea, a feature that you want to build to your execs or whatever it is, then it's, oh, I found in the market there's this problem, let me tell you about the problem that these customers or potential customers have. It's terrible, they've tried all kinds of different solutions, it's not working, there's a big opportunity. Then you say the solution, well, the solution in that case is really, here's all the things that they tried that didn't work, here's the thing that they're using that's making them unhappy, and then the results part is really where you pitch, here's how we can solve that problem for them. So that's a way to think about PSR in that context. And then finally, oh, I went the wrong way, sorry. Wait a minute. Oh, so the weirdest thing about this, I think of next slide as an up action. This thing thinks of it as a down action. So I've been going the wrong way. There we go. So pitching a new product idea, there we go. So it's a market problem with significant impact. I just already talked about this. And then the final thing to know about how to tell these stories is there's a lot of times where you want to put these stories into like on your resume or into when a salesperson is talking to a prospect and the prospect says, well, I have an inventory problem. Well, you're not going to tell the whole story necessarily in that case. You might say, oh, I've had customers with an inventory problem. Let me set up a demo to show you how a customer solved the inventory problem. Actually, he eventually got promoted to regional director by using our solution. So I talk about the results by solution. I don't talk about the problem because the problem was already discussed. So that's an idea of a bullet point, right? Now, if you have stories about yourself, this is how you do your bullet points on your resume. You don't talk about the problem, you talk about a result by solution. So I have a story that I tell. I helped, I enabled the sales team to make quota three quarters in a row where they have been not making quota before that by giving them a new way to demo, which actually is totally related to all this stuff, but that's a different story. So that's how that goes. That's how that goes on your bullet point. So just think, you have PSR, which is problem, solution, results. For the bullets, you have results by solution. It all becomes kind of obvious when you try to do it. It's not easy. Don't get me wrong on that. But it becomes obvious. Okay. So an advanced topic. There's 2 advanced topics. One of them is your story, which is fantastic. I don't know your name. Anna. So Anna's story. Customer came to her with a problem. He needed all these things turned on. Well, it turned out there was another problem. I mean, he had actually multiple problems. He couldn't get anybody to solve his problem, blah, blah, blah. But there was another problem underlying, which was that he had this other personal problem that was really important. And a lot of times, when you are, particularly for your own personal stories, you're gonna be brought in to solve a problem, and you're gonna find out that the real problem is a different problem. And the problem that you were brought in to solve is a symptom. Or was told, or was not even that important compared to the problem that you really find. And so, this is a really great story structure if you have it. It's very grabby. Almost all Hollywood blockbusters use this form. There's something that happens, so people come in to solve that problem, and they look at, and they find out there's this whole other thing that's happening, and they have to go do this other thing that is super hard. And that's how most Hollywood blockbusters work. And you know, there's a reason we always, in the storytelling conversations, refer back to movies, is because they're great at telling stories. And so, that's it. The other thing about, sometimes there's a setup where you have to sort of describe what your business was, maybe. Like Anna did that in her little story as well. She said, oh, you know, I was a network technician. Because sometimes it just might not come out in the story itself, but you have to set some context. Okay, so that is it. We have, according to the clock, 4.5 minutes, 3.5 minutes for questions. Yes?
Could you tie branding, for example, personal branding to these stories? Or like for writing a bio or things like that?
I can. It's a different topic, really. But I have a whole iconoclastic view of branding. But in personal branding, I think it's really nice to have something that says, I have a reputation for. And that's going to align with the stories. So that's a way to think about it. That's the way I think about it. Other questions? I told it all.
Well, I have a question.
Yes,
But it will be very selfish and
that's fine.
I just walked in.
Oh,
Can you give me like your,
you missed the whole thing.
can you give me a 30-second summary of it?
30-second story, sure. So, stories have beginning, middle, and end. The beginning is the problem, the middle is the solution you did or that somebody did, the end is the results. If you use that structure, and actually if you read my latest blog post, if you go to, Secret Product Management, secretpmhandbook.com/blog, you can find my latest blog post, which actually basically covers the content of this talk.
Just can't.
Not as well, because I was, you know, I don't have actual like interactive stuff on my blog like here.
You said you have the slides for us?
So
It's there? Okay.
I'm gonna put the slides there. They're not there yet, so I don't know how you're gonna find that later, but just remember SVP Camp, that's gonna be the URL.
They'll probably put a link to your slides on the
Yeah, but once I have, I do have slides, but they're not in any place yet. They're just on my computer.
You can also put them in SlideShare.
Yeah.
Maybe some other people want to ask questions
You
that came.
have a question?
No, this is good. I was just trying to
Okay. That's
balance
fine.
out the comments.
Any other questions?
So where did you delineate product management, product marketing, technical marketing? Where do you draw these lines? Or those lines are kind of different?
They're very fuzzy. Those lines are very fuzzy. I think the product management really is responsible for success of all those people, not necessarily doing it. But, yeah. Yes?
Have you tried to apply this kind of structure, these concepts to, when working with engineering teams, sometimes we use user stories to explain requirements?
Fantastic question. Thank you for asking that question. So, first of all, I hate user stories. I think they're stupid. And in particular, even if people want them, I don't want to write them. The engineers can write them if they want. I write what I call them feature specs, but they're, but basically they're higher level. But bottom line, yes, user story. As a user, I want to do X. I don't care what as a user you want to do, particularly because an engineer is writing it, and engineers don't know what users want. So that's a whole other thing. But if you were to write a user story in the form of, people have this problem that's giving them this terrible outcome. If we do this solution, then they're going to have these results. I'm okay with that. I typically try to write those at a higher level. And I actually have a template that's also on the blog where I specifically say, because I think there's some other parts that need to be in there, like does product management and engineering understand, have we had enough of a conversation that we both understand what each other's talking about? How do we know we're done? So acceptance tests, what are our expectations for how it's gonna be used, the feature or whatever, and how are we gonna measure that? Does it leverage things we know? Is it aligned with our strategy? Things like that. So I have an acronym called VALUABLE. VALUABLE stands for valuable, aligned, leverages, understood, acceptance tests, where am I bounded? So we may not know exactly how big it is, but we're pretty confident we can do it. Second L is loved, why do customers love it, and expectations for usage. So it's on the blog. Yes?
Gentleman earlier asked about the dividing line between product marketing and product management, and having many times managed both of them. The most successful teams I've had have had product managers that are able to articulate a story that gets underneath why the feature's important. It's not so much about you, quote unquote, doing marketing, but that context makes everything downstream make sense. When you look at a corporate website and it's a bulleted list of factual features and functionality, it has no grounding in anything, and it makes it really hard to sell. It makes it really hard to create and craft messages around it. But to the extent product management, is in contact with customers and does understand their pain and does understand, why it really matters, then all of a sudden everything takes on a whole new life, and everyone's job gets easier and the experience is better for it.
Yeah, totally agree. I think of product marketing just one step farther is product management articulates the value proposition and tells customer stories and why we do things, why features exist, right, from the standpoint of what problems they solve. Product marketing then goes and finds the people that have that problem and brings them in so that we can sell to them. And then sales goes and sells to them using the stories that product management has helped to uncover and has helped to articulate. That's the way that I kind of describe it. Obviously, they're all fluid, and there's, yes?
Well, talking about all those teams, are there any tips to ensuring like the story remains kind of the same? It doesn't kind of morph, because I guess you tell a story and then people start relaying it, but the story that the user hears by sales is totally different. I don't know.
I would say you should be spending a lot of time with sales anyway, and hear how they're telling your stories. Because the other thing is that you're going to be learning things from sales, because they're talking to customers, like they go back and try to sell more stuff, and the customer's going to say, oh, hey, let me tell you about this thing that happened with your product. Well, if they're going to hear that, you want to be in a position to hear that as well, either by talking to the salespeople in separate conversations or sometimes in those customer conversations. So,
Yeah, I want to bring in the dimension of time, right? With regards to sales and customers, there are two dimensions. Either you have a product already developed and you're talking about the past, you're talking about your story in terms of a product already delivered. That's one thing. But also you may want to talk about needs that you are going to fulfill in the next release or something like that.
Sure.
Whereas with the development teams, you want to communicate what you want them to develop for the next release, right? So there's a dimension of time. So my question is, with regards to that, how often do you refresh your story? Is that every iteration? Is that it or what?
It really depends it really depends on how fast the problem changes, right? If the problem is still relevant, then the story will still work, I think, roughly speaking. I mean, there's a lot of things that can change. But if the problem, I think the fundamental driving force of all of this is the problem. What is the market problem? What is the problem that needs to be solved? What is the problem the customer has or had? And as long as that's relevant, then the story remains interesting. If you're talking about a prospective feature, I want to go talk to a customer about a problem that I'm going to solve for them. I'm actually probably not going to start by telling a story. I'm going to ask by asking them about the problems they have and make sure this is one of them. Or I might say, what type of challenges do you have in this area? If they don't say the problem that I'm trying to solve, I might have a second thought about whether I should solve it. And then if they say they are, obviously further on in that conversation over time, I might say, well, okay, so you mentioned this problem, do you still have that problem? How about if we do this? I don't want to lead them, that's on the new stuff, on stuff that's upcoming, I don't want to lead the customer. I want them to basically I want them to draw a solution out of me in a sense.
Thanks.
We're over time. Thank you for, apparently there's a way to vote for these sessions. So if you like the session, you can vote for it. I have no idea how you do that. But there's a prize at the end. So it's something on site.
Yeah.
So if you vote,
/survey.
if you vote today, then maybe I win a prize. Maybe my own book or something. I don't know.
Thank you.